Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranjo. Welcome to episode 138. And on this week's episode of the podcast, I am going to be reviewing The Amateur, a spy revenge thriller starring Rami Malek. As this is a film review, there will be a non-spoiler section as well as a spoiler section. Time codes will be listed in the episode description, so there's no need to worry if you haven't had a chance to see the film yet. Maybe you've been at Minecraft and you're throwing popcorn and chickens around, and if you are, you are the bane of my existence, and I hope you don't see any more movies in the theater. And to round out the episode, I will be reacting to listener mail and answers of Question of the Week. Let's jump into The Amateur non-spoiler review.
Tell me where to find Horst Schiller.
Who are you?
You held a gun to my wife's head. She was terrified.
You have the wrong guy.
Yeah, I know. You didn't pull the trigger. So, tell me where to find him.
Now, a little inside baseball. I think people appreciate that with the whole concept of this podcast, which is my screening for this was interesting because a lot of the marketing for The Amateur has been around IMAX, and there have been a substantial amount of movies that don't look like they're made for the theatrical going experience. The press screening for this being in IMAX was definitely something I appreciated. As with a lot of espionage films where you travel around the world, it's nice to see these incredible vistas of the incredible world that we live in, traveling to international countries, that being, of course, I'm being based in North America, but seeing a wide array of different countries and landscapes and geography as well as architecture that the world has to offer. So I thought that was really cool. The Amateur is an interesting movie where Rami Malek, of course, is an Academy Award winner from his performance as Freddie Mercury in Bohemian Rhapsody. I don't want to fall down a rabbit hole of that. This being an adaptation of a novel was not something I was familiar with whatsoever, and a lot of the marketing material is around the idea that Rami Malek's character of Charlie Heller is somebody who is not a killer, is not a violent person. He's much more into the coding aspect as well as the methodical and the intellectual parts of working for the Central Intelligence Agency. And then obviously a tragedy ensues where he is out for vengeance. It's a revenge action espionage thriller. You could attach a bunch of different adjectives to describe this film. And unfortunately, my biggest carryover from watching this is Rami Malek's character and the portrayal of Charlie felt very familiar to that of his character in Mr. Robot, just in terms of what we are expected to see from Rami Malek in this movie. He does not have the physicality that we are used to with a lot of other espionage or spy film leads, and that's part of what the gimmick is of this movie, that he's able to outthink his problems and that he's not an assassin like you would think of that potentially works within the CIA. The plot of the movie gets kind of muddled and messy to some degree, which is Charlie Heller's arc. Rami Malek, I'm just going to keep saying Rami Malek, but Rami Malek's arc throughout the film felt very inconsistent to me. Obviously, when somebody goes through some sort of tragedy, we saw it with John Wick and a dog. In this film, it being that of his wife, you can understand the vengeance that he feels and why he is out for revenge against the people that harmed his wife. You can understand that character's motivation, which makes it much easier when, in my opinion, it's a human being he's lost, his chosen partner through life. So you can reason with the character doing horrible things because of what has been done to them. And the focus on what killing means for your soul or your psyche seems to be a focus in this, which is really inconsistent with the way that it's handled in the conclusion, in my opinion. And unfortunately, one of the main marketing ploys for this film, ploys may be extreme, but one of the strategies is to show Rami Malek's character's intelligence in where we see pieces of the death traps he has set up, akin to Home Alone, not Saw. They're much grander than that, and this is definitely not a film that has any gruesome nature to it whatsoever, or torture, you know what it's called. And unfortunately for the movie, some of the marketing has included the most spectacular trap that he sets And the movie fails to present anything more interesting than that trap. It's akin to the opposite of what we've gotten with the Mission Impossible films as of late outside of Dead Reckoning, which is those movies market a stunt, and very brilliantly, it's usually in the beginning or the middle of the film, and there's an even more spectacular stunt at the end. Rogue Nation did this, as well as Fallout, and then Dead Reckoning, of course, marketed Tom Cruise doing that incredible jump into the parachuting that he does to get onto the train in that movie. This movie doesn't have anything else spectacular to offer. Now, it looks great. That is definitely a massive positive that I had while watching the movie, which is it's nice to see cinematography that looks like it is made for the big screen. What's so interesting in the current climate of watching movies on streaming is they look as if they're made for those platforms. They're not meant to be on big screens. Some of the films that Netflix ironically makes do wind up getting limited releases, Glass Onion being an example of that. But throughout the movie, and it's hard to talk about because spy films usually have a substantial amount that you can't talk about without it being considered a spoiler. So I am having a hard time doing that with the non-spoiler review of The Amateur. And expecting a certain amount of twists and turns just being in this genre is kind of par for the course. And for the most part, that stuff is presented, but the depth to which it is explored is not really on par with some of the better aspects of some of these films that have done more lately. It seemed to have an exploration akin to something like a TV pilot, which is there more to get out of this? No, probably not. And unfortunately, that left me just sort of feeling as if this is a movie. We've seen a lot of these elements before. It tries to have its own unique spin with Rami Malek's version of a spy, him not being the suave brute, the James Bond, or even having the tactical know-how like a Jason Bourne. He approaches all of his problems more cerebrally. That would be engaging, and Rami Malek does a good job in it, but so much of this movie feels very familiar, where you can kind of expect where each of the major set pieces or the way that the 3-act structure is going to be laid out. And its conclusion, in my opinion, kind of undermines the arc of Rami Malek's character. I found it to be really inconsistent and not match the journey that he's going on. This concept of morality and what it means to be a killer seems to be something that the film wants to explore, but ultimately, what it has to say at the end of it, I don't think lines up at all with the journey we go on with Charlie Heller, which I found particularly interesting. I appreciate Lawrence Fishburne showing up as a cool mentor. It's something that I really like from him. And of course, we're going to believe that he is a teacher. He's been doing it since 1999 when he was Morpheus. So this film is a movie that looks great as a movie and has some spectacle to the locations that they go to, as well as some of the cool traps that are set up. But outside of that, there's going to be a lot in this that people are going to be reminded of other movies, and it failed to stand on its own feet as its own perspective on the espionage revenge thriller, which is unfortunate because it has a good cast in it. Rachel Brosnahan shows up in this movie, and I was joking with the people that I saw this with that clearly somebody at 20th Century saw this and maybe talked to the DC and Warner Brothers crew, because Charlie Heller, of course, is what you could categorize as a nerd. And they figured, well, she can do that with this. Of course, we're going to put her with Clark Kent. And she's a phenomenal actress coming from Miss Maisel. And she's, of course, going to be in Superman later this year. But that character's relationship with Rami Malek, the investment that we're supposed to feel in his loss, the setup for that doesn't give you enough screen time to really feel that relationship. Obviously, the passing of somebody's wife to murder is a tragic thing that would, of course, have unbearable amounts of emotion on all sides of the spectrum. But when you don't get to explore that relationship to its fullest, and there is an element in the movie to which they try to include more of her, but the understanding as to why that's happened isn't really explored. The basis to which we get to know Charlie, Rami Malek's character, is surface level stuff where the movie's not very long. It's just over 2 hours. And maybe with 10 or 15 more minutes, we could have really explored his relationship and outside of the vengeance, really understand this character's mentality, which is disappointing because it's a movie that is based on an original film or a Canadian novel. Woo! But it's going to be an entry into this genre that is ultimately, in my opinion, going to be forgettable, which is disappointing when you have a substantial cast for the movie. I really liked John Bernthal for the 2 minutes that he's in it, but I don't think it's necessarily memorable, which sucks because you have something new that's not a sequel or a remake, which I know a lot of people have been complaining about, but this is a film that probably doesn't justify the theatrical screening just because of the fact that it is so familiar. So let's jump into spoilers and then I can take you through all the twists and turns of The Amateur.
You surprised me, Charlie. I can't tell you how rare that is, but it ends here. There are no 3 volley salutes in this work. We're the John Does that get found in the dumpster if we get found, which you won't.
Thankfully, we are in spoilers, so I can now tell you everything that I didn't like and why I think this movie actually had a lot of potential, but fails to meet it, which is Charlie Heller is a data analyst, somebody who works in terms of encryption, clearly, within the CIA. It's listed here as Decryption and Analysis Division. Obviously a very smart individual, and clearly is somebody who maybe doesn't necessarily understand all the social cues of people, and I felt it was very reminiscent of Mr. Robot. Clearly Rami Malek is good at that, not shocking given how I believe he won an Emmy for it. I should probably look that up. I don't think he did. Does he have an Emmy and an Academy Award? Let's look up your awards, Remy. No. Yes, he did win one. And he is given from one of his correspondents, I guess, what you would call them, a bunch of dossiers and documents from within the CIA. And it turns out that they have been altered for the public, that the CIA was doing some black ops operations and was lying about the circumstances of deaths within foreign countries. Obviously, that is a really big problem. And what's so interesting about the introduction of that element of the movie is it would lead you, the viewer, to believe that is going to be a larger part of the story, and it ultimately just turns into his smoking gun to blackmail his supervisor, or the assistant supervisor, who's played by Holt McElhaney, of what he wants to get done. Rachel Brosnahan's character, Charlie's wife, goes to London just because of some sort of business trip, and she's killed happenstance. It's a complete coincidence, and ultimately has nothing to do with the conspiracy involved. You can rearrange this movie to have it feel much more connected and cohesive, because it being just a freak accident undercuts some of the story. The whole deputy being involved in these black ops operations, and obviously a lot of this is familiar territory. Treadstone from the Mission Impossible movies, more recently The Syndicate, which was a main focus of Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Underground black ops and unsanctioned missions are kind of par for the course. And to have something wrapped around where there could have been an option where Charlie finds this out and his wife asks him to go on the trip, and it would have made so much sense in the movie if Charlie was supposed to go with Rachel Brosnahan to London. They're aware he has this obviously very scathing information, and they're both supposed to be killed, and the terrorists who do kill his wife just wind up killing her because he's supposed to be there based on the information they're given. Automatically, it makes everything feel much more connected, and wrapping that whole storyline about the lying and the unsanctioned events wind up being part of the story at the end of it, which is the terrorist organization is somewhat connected to the CIA. And it felt weird to me that we kind of paused that story and then go on Charlie's revenge mission, which is weird, where after Charlie finds this information and his wife is killed, learning that the CIA is not going to go on a manhunt for the people responsible for her death, because similar to, I'm assuming, police investigations, they don't just want the middlemen, they want the people at the top responsible for this crew. He uses this information he has to blackmail the CIA into training him so he can go and look for the killers himself, or at least just be a trained individual. That's where he meets Lawrence Fishburne, who is his CIA Morpheus. And I think the dynamic between them is really compelling. Him seeing that Charlie is not a cold-blooded killer. He doesn't have that in him. And it's something that he argues is broken within people and sees it as his strength that he can't kill people. Of course, Charlie has thought all of this through, and I like to see his level of intellect because it makes all of the death traps he sets up later much more convincing, where he has had this whole methodical plan in getting new identities so that way he is able to travel around the world and find the people responsible. And when I talked about the balancing act of his morality being a focus of the movie, what's so weird is he completely accidentally winds up being responsible for the death of the first person. He tries to poison her with pollen because it's something she's allergic to, and ultimately while chasing her, she gets hit by a car. The next guy is a whole nother level, which is the scene you've seen in the trailers, which is he depressurizes a pool that is between two buildings, and that guy falls to his death. Obviously an incredible and cinematic death trap that removes all the violence, because of course you don't see the guy's body shredded to pieces or down on the ground after he's impacted with it. And then the next one is just a container full of bombs, and if the guy lets go of the lid, it's going to explode. And with each death, Charlie is finding it somewhat easier because he is getting closer to finding the man who actually killed his wife, which would make sense because similar to a lot of things we've seen that deal with the morality of death, it allegedly becomes easier each time that you do it. And we're trying to maintain this balancing act of Charlie is still this good guy that we met in the beginning, while also him likely going down the road of being a cold-blooded killer. He has an instance where he has a conversation in Russia with John Bernthal that he's not this guy and that he can't just keep doing this because he's going to lose who he is. I wish that really was the focus, but it doesn't really wind up being that. And what's especially interesting after that is he eventually does find the man responsible who did kill his wife, who is in charge of this terrorist organization. And he doesn't kill him. He just has him arrested and brought in, this unveiling the conspiracy and the unsanctioned missions. From a morality standpoint and tracking Charlie's arc through it, I did not find this to be a rewarding conclusion, given the fact that the people he did kill were not responsible for the death of his wife. They were involved, but they're not the ones to pull the trigger. And as a viewer, of course, murder is a horrendous act, arguably the worst thing you could possibly do imaginable. But when you're in the midst of watching a thriller like this, to compare it to something like John Wick, and cards on the table, I am not a dog owner. I'm not somebody who has any pets. But to be on board with somebody who is out for vengeance because of the death of his dog, which he was then given because of his dying wife, you can understand the mission to which John Wick goes on. And following Rami Malek through this movie, you are on board with what he's doing because of the death of his human wife. I don't know why I said human, but the death of his wife. And the satisfying ending to that is, oh, I arrested you and you're going to be responsible for the reveal that there's been this conspiracy within the CIA. The deputy director is bad. Okay, it's just not necessarily a satisfying conclusion. He doesn't do anything physically to this guy. There is not a third climactic death trap that is as compelling as the other ones. It's, I had your boat moved to a new location. Isn't that incredible? I'm so smart. And it undercuts the revenge aspect of this because and going back to the start of the movie, we don't have this dynamic where the deputy director and him have this back and forth. Maybe the deputy director doesn't think Charlie is a necessary part of the CIA. It only happens after Charlie finds out that all these dossiers were changed for the public. So the relationship investment on the revenge doesn't line up. I feel like if we had John Bernthal in the movie more to establish this, and we have Lawrence Fishburne in it a bit. You heard in the clip here, he is sent to go find Charlie and obviously is on Charlie's side. He doesn't want to kill him, even though that's the mission he's been given. But Charlie is on his own for so long, and then he meets his informant, who's somebody based in Turkey, Inquiline, and they go back and forth on what it's meant to them to be involved with this, but it really did feel muddled and inconclusive, which bothered me and left the conclusion feeling completely unsatisfying, which was disappointing because I wanted to love this movie. I thought all of the marketing for it was really cool. I like the intellectual aspect in trying to tackle these missions as opposed to just shoot 'em ups or, I mean, bombs are traps, but the way in which it established he was going to use them. So you wind up with a movie that's just kind of fine, that, as I said in on spoilers, it is formulaic and familiar, and it's predictable because of that. And I'll give them this. The ending wasn't necessarily something I saw coming, given the arc that Charlie seemed to be on. But it's a movie that I probably won't watch again. I can recommend it if you like spy thrillers, but there are definitely more out there that are memorable and definitely more that are more cinematic. So that will do it for my amateur review. Let's jump into question of the week responses and listener mail.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
This week's question of the week was, what is your favorite revenge thriller? Alex Pocket 85 said Prisoners. Scotty Cameron says, man, this is such a wide range of films. I might just have to go with John Wick. As a pet owner, it's so satisfying seeing a protagonist avenge his pet. And then, separate thing, Minecraft is such a weird choice to make into a movie because it doesn't have a lot of plot at all. All the lore just comes from roaming in the open world. I know Telltale made Minecraft Story Mode, which is point-and-click RPG set in Minecraft. I miss the Telltale games. I absolutely adored the Batman ones. And if you haven't played them, there was a lot of influence from those games that were taken into the Robert Pattinson The Batman, for interest for any of our listeners. My brother is a Warcraft fan and he despises the movie with a passion. We saw that back in theaters in 2016. So that helps my point, Scotty, which was that even video game fans didn't necessarily love the movie, which is quite of a statement based on what of the lore that was adapted by. Now, let's see what our other answers were. We have Dylan Pollock, of course, friend of the show from Movies to Watch Before You Die. Favorite revenge thriller is Too Hard. So I'm just going to say an underrated one is Ricochet, with John Lithgow getting revenge on Denzel Washington for putting him in prison, and Denzel Washington getting revenge on John Lithgow for ruining his life. Two people getting revenge for the price of one. Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with that one. Maybe it is a movie to watch before you die. And then we have what has become my favorite segment of the podcast, which is Scotty Cameron writes a novel on YouTube. So here we go. Dang, I wish I had thought of Gears of War because that is a great franchise. I guess I blanked on it because of how bad the Halo show was, and I didn't think of Gears of War as a show out of fear of Microsoft giving it to Paramount Television. That Reigns of God of War and Paramount would pick the showrunner to realm Halo, who realmed Halo. Also, I did recently play Splinter Cell Conviction and Blacklist, so it's fresher in my mind. Okay, that's fair. Particularly with Michael Ironside giving a great Sam Fisher performance in Conviction. Just watch Sam's rage from Conviction. I also did think about his age when it came to voicing him in the animated series. Liev feels like a good choice for Sam in a live-action film, honestly. He was good in another Tom Clancy title, Sum of All Fears, as John Clark. I've seen that. It's good. So he's a good choice for Sam. He's probably a better choice for voicing Sam Fisher than Tom Hardy, simply because Tom Hardy is too British and Sam Wilson is very American. Or Sam Fisher. Also, I don't think that Splinter Cell thing is happening, Scotty. That movie was announced like 10 years ago. Tom Clancy loves American exceptionalism. I generally favor voice actors for something animated. Totally agree with that. There's too many celebrities. I mean, look at all the Disney films. And then here we go. Yeah, length of novels does generally determine whether something is better suited for film or television. Also, how crucial the novel's length is to the overall story. I had this conversation with my brother a few times, and his answer is very similar to Kyle's answer. That's me. Hello. It really depends on the novel and if cutting content negatively impacts the quality of the adaptation. He cites Song of Ice and Fire as books that lent themselves to television really well. For anyone wondering, Song and Fire of Ice is the series of Game of Thrones. Yeah, the show was titled Game of Thrones, which was the novel's adapting, handles various plot threads with care. When Game of Thrones used up the story from Song of Ice and Fire, it went downhill really fast. Yeah, I blame George R. R. Martin for that. If he was busy writing novels instead of all the other stuff, we maybe would have those books by now. Here we go. Lord of the Rings is a series we can agree was better suited for films because cutting stuff out like Tom Bombadil from the films didn't make those movies worse, and it makes the films more straightforward than they would have been if you followed the books with a fine-tooth comb. Books like Hannibal, Reacher, and the Ryanverse, Jack Ryan and John Clark, lend themselves to both formats as well, particularly when the shows can shed light on something a film couldn't do properly, such as an internal thought of a character has in a novel, and it's very hard to depict that in a movie without inflating the runtime. Also, television isn't based on how like Neely is in all 3 seasons of Reacher, even though she's only in one of those books. Those seasons are of the show that are based on. She's woven into season 1 and 3 in a way that's not distracting and actually serves the plot. Meanwhile, when Legolas appears in the Hobbit films, it's very distracting, largely because he wasn't in the books. Also, that character doesn't fit with his overall continuity of how he feels about the dwarves specifically, but I don't have time to talk about the Hobbit. Also, he just feels so out of place in those movies. It's just more fan service than actual plot relevance. I agree. Also, I still can't believe The Hobbit was stretched into 3 movies. That was a bit excessive, even for one book. Fine, my answer will end here. I think you bring up a lot of great points, Scotty, which is, more often than not, what's truly important to that requires such an substantial fine-tooth comb. And then I did get a question from Jermaine, which is he wanted me to react to 2 trailers specifically. The first is Love, Death, and Robots, Jermaine. I absolutely love taking such a wide variety of creators and allowing them to tell such intricate but detailed short form stories is brilliant. One of the directors from Love, Death, and Robots went on to direct the trailer for Bungie's next video game Marathon. And I love the aesthetic of that, where it's a really tangible robot world. And then Murderbot, man, I don't know. Sometimes Apple makes good movies and sometimes they don't. I really don't know how to feel about this. It looks interesting, but at the same time, man, I'm not sure if it's going to be very good or not. It's got the big kaiju and Alexander Skarsgård, but I don't know. It is something. I'll definitely give it a try. I really like Apple TV Plus. I think it is definitely one of the lesser appreciated streaming platforms. So there's that. This week's question of the week, because next week's episode will be a review of Sinners. It's very specific and much more intricate than the wide range of options that you could submit for last week's question of the week. This week's question of the week is simple. What is your favorite Michael B. Jordan film? Is it one of the Creeds? Is it one of his films where he's collaborated with Ryan Coogler? I'm really curious. He obviously has made a wide variety of films, and he's dipped his toe into a bunch of different genres. So I'm really looking forward to that. To submit your answer to question of the week, you can simply comment directly on the podcast YouTube channel, Spotify. You can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com, or you can @filmreelist on any of the social medias. Just make sure to include the hashtag QOTW. If you want to answer directly on the question of the week social media post, that always goes up on Thursday, so you can look for that there. Just make sure you have notifications on for when the Film Realist posts new posts. Obviously, that's me, but you know what I'm saying. And lastly, if this is your first time listening to the Film Realist podcast, please follow on your preferred podcast platform. as well as leaving a 5-star review, as it helps the podcast jump into the algorithm and get seen and heard by more people, which just helps the show grow and provides me with really cool opportunities that I can then bring to the podcast moving forward. As referenced in the question of the week, next week's episode is going to be a review of Sinners, but please make sure you have notifications on your podcast platform, because there will be a bonus episode, but it won't be titled bonus. It'll be a regular number because it is going to be a spoiler-filled review of a TV show that I've really enjoyed. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled to your favorite podcast platform. My name is Kyle Naranya. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I hope to see you next time.